Conservatives and a reformist. Who do you think is really the front runner at this point, and why?
Well, the latest polls show that the reformist candidate Pezeshkian is in the lead. However, given the fact that this will likely go to a second round, the question is, will the other conservatives then rally around the one conservative candidate that will be in the final in the second round? And if so, it can end up becoming a much, much tougher race for Pezeshkian. But so far, the divisions within the conservatives turn out to be quite stark. Only one of them has pulled out, and that happened today. And the two leading ones, both Jalili and Ghalibaf, have made it very clear they're not going to pull out, which means that they're going to split the vote. Both of them are aiming to be the second person in the second round, and then hope to be able to get all of the conservative votes behind them. But that doesn't seem to be necessarily an easy task.
Trita, voter turnout is expected to be low here, and that's because many Iranians are completely disillusioned by this system that they see as increasingly controlled. They say this election, these candidates only offer a facade of international legitimacy, covering up an otherwise authoritative regime. Can you react to that?
Well, certainly in the last couple of years, we have seen how a lot of people, I would say a majority clearly in the Iranian society, gave up on the idea that reform could work, that the system could be changed from inside, and they opted for protests. But a lot of them have now also turned away from that because those protests did not bring down the regime. And instead, you're seeing now a degree of enthusiasm growing just in the last couple of days for the elections. Nothing compared to what it was 20 years ago when Iranian presidential elections had participation rates of above 75%. But it seems quite likely that it could be somewhere between 55 and 60%, which would be almost 12% higher than it was last time in 2021 when they hit the low of only 47, 48% participation rate. I think for a lot of people inside of Iran, they're not buying the argument by some exiles or by the regime itself that participation in the election means that you're legitimizing the elections. What they're looking for is just something that can help them improve their economic lives, which unfortunately for the last 2 decades has become increasingly harsh, particularly as a result of the confrontation between Iran and the West and the Western sanctions that have strangled the Iranian middle class.
Indeed, and that's why we've seen a crippled currency and skyrocketing inflation. Of course, strong Western sanctions are a key reason that voters may actually come out to the polls and push for more reformist candidates. But let's see what happens on the ground. Also wanted to ask you, because this is a race for president, it is seen as, secondary to the supreme leader in Iran, who holds the ultimate power and authority here. Given this lineup of candidates, how do you expect the eventual outcome to ultimately impact regional dynamics, particularly Iran's foreign policy and its relations with countries or its issues with countries like Saudi Arabia, like Israel, for example? Will this have a material impact on Iranian domestic or foreign policy?
Well, it would certainly have an impact on domestic policy. I think it's quite clear that there's a significant difference between Pezeshkian and Jalili, for instance, as there was a great difference between Khatami and Ahmadinejad, even though you're quite right, the presidency is not the most important position within that system. But I think when it comes to regional policy, you're not going to see any significant change between any of these different candidates. Iran's relationship with Hezbollah, for instance, or its strategy of trying to neutralize sanctions by intensifying and improving its relations with Arab neighbors is going to continue. But on the issue of Iran's relations with the West, there is a difference, with Pezeshkian pursuing a much more bold approach and trying to resolve tensions with the West through negotiations. Ghalibaf seems to be hinting at that direction as well. But with Jalili, you have someone who is priding himself of having been an opponent of the Iran nuclear deal, and who is extremely skeptical of any type of serious engagement with Western powers.